Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network begins in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network begins in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network begins in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network begins in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network begins in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show begins in 5 seconds.
America, bonjour, hi, Canada, greetings on this Thursday, October the 17th, 2019. I'm Hugh Hewitt inside the Beltway in the ReliefFactor.com studio. I begin with sad news that Representative Elijah Cummings, a fierce partisan Democrat, but a grand old man of Congress, has passed away at Johns Hopkins University from cancer. It was long expected. He'd been sick for a long time, but very, very sad. He was a fixture when the Democrats would come out and beat up on the Republicans. And that's fine. I mean, that's how the House is supposed to be. It's a democracy. You got Nancy Pelosi yelling at Donald Trump yesterday and Donald Trump taunting her on Twitter. And it's just the rollicking roller coaster of American freedom and busting out the punching bag and getting it on each other's case. Elijah Cummings, always a brawler, and good for all of them to throw their swings and do so transparently instead of smiling like a party platform Politburo getting together and talking everything is fine. Speaking of which, by the way, today in downtown D.C. inside the Beltway, the Nixon Foundation, of which I am the president, and the Wilson Center, bipartisan policy organization, is going to spend all day talking about China. Now, it's sold out, so you have to go to Nixon Foundation online if you want to watch it, but it's all China all the time, and we're making up for what the Democrats did not mention China once in 3-hour debate on Tuesday night. Unbelievable. Biggest national security challenge, how to get along with China, how to do it strategically. That is coming up today, and you can watch it either the Wilson Center's webcast or the Nixon Foundation all day long. Other headlines: hasty U.S. pullback, a seismic shift for Middle East. I disagree. I've been telling you why. I never thought those were defensible lines, but I think we got to stay in Iraq. Trump strikes back at criticism over the Syria move. He was swinging wildly, according to the Democrats. According to Trump, the Democrats staged the whole thing yesterday, the big meltdown. Biggest news of all, Leader McConnell told his Senate GOP caucus, we're going to do impeachment trial in about 6 days around Thanksgiving. So he's just moving through it like Mitch. It's completely political. He's simply not going to be ruffled by it. It's not going to work. And the Democrats will then mutter about the impeachment, and I think they are stepping in it, but lots more ahead of that. I'm going to focus this hour on something unusual, something that happened at Notre Dame University on Saturday, and it wasn't their crushing of USC. It was the fact that the Attorney General of the United States went to Notre Dame and gave a speech which every American ought to hear, and that's why I'm going to play the whole thing this hour and next. Bill Barr talking about religious liberty. And that is so important. It's important because I'm a person of faith. You know, I'm an evangelical Roman Catholic Presbyterian. I go to Mass on Saturday night and I go to the Presbyterian Church on Sunday. I go to a Bible study. I believe in my faith. I am not ashamed of the gospel. But I know that for the last 15 years, it has been under attack in the public square by secular absolutists at every turn. And this is the most important speech by a public figure on religious liberty in my life, is the one that Attorney General Barr gave on Saturday. I finally got the tape of it, and I want you to hear it. And while you're listening to it, if you were inspired by him, go over to HughHewitt.com and contribute to Alliance Defending Freedom. It's coincident with my campaign to raise money for Alliance Defending Freedom. The banner is at the top of HughHewitt.com. If you hear anything you agree with, go over there and click and send $10 or $50 or $100 or $1,000. Alliance Defending Freedom is working for everyone out there. Their phone number is 866-700-1060. 866-700-1060. Here is Attorney General Barr at the beginning of his speech in Notre Dame, cut number 1.
I'd like to thank Tony DeNicola, whose generous support has shaped and continues to shape countless minds through examination of the Catholic moral and intellectual tradition. When my daughter Meg, after she graduated and ultimately went to law school, she became very ill for a period of time, and I knew there were great kids at Notre Dame, people of great character, and for a long period of time there was always one of her classmates visiting us. They worked it out so there was always someone coming to visit us while she was being treated in the hospital and so forth. And we got very close to all her friends, and we loved them to death. And Notre Dame will always have a special place in my heart because of that. I have 5 grandchildren now with another on the way, and I'd be very proud if they all end up at Notre Dame. Meg, incidentally, recovered and got married recently. She got married on December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And the day before, I got a call from the president who was walking out to the helicopters, and he said, "Bill, I know we talked about putting the announcement off until after your daughter's wedding, but I'd sort of like to do it today if it's okay with you, but it's totally up to you." And I said, "Well, Mr. President, we talked about it, and whatever suits you, we'll adjust to. That'll be fine." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll do it now while I'm walking out to the helicopters." So I turned on I was, lounging around in my study at home, and I turned on the television. And it was sort of the first of a number of outer-body experiences I've had since then, because he walks over and he goes, "I'm selecting Bill Barr to be Attorney General of the United States." And that was the day before. That was Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, and the next day was my daughter's wedding. And she said to me, "Pop, you're the only guy I know who would upstage his daughter at her wedding." But when I gave the toast, I said, "Meg, it's okay, because just as the Barr name is going to be dragged through the mud, you're changing your name to McGaughey."
So he kept going, then he got serious about what he was going to talk about. Cut number 2 of the Bill Barr speech Saturday at Notre Dame.
Today, I would like to share some thoughts with you about religious liberty in America. It's an important priority in this administration and for this Department of Justice. We've set up a task force within the department in which all the various components that have equities in this area, the Solicitor General's office, the Civil Division, the Office of Legal Counsel, and other offices are all represented. And we have regular meetings, and we keep an eye out for cases or events around the country where states are misapplying the Establishment Clause in a way that discriminates against people of faith, or cases where states adopt laws that impinge upon the free exercise of religion. From the founding era onward, there was strong consensus about the centrality of religious liberty in the United States. The imperative of protecting religious freedom was not just a nod in the direction of piety. It reflects the framers' belief that religion was indispensable to sustaining our free system of government. In his renowned 1785 pamphlet, Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments, James Madison described religious liberty as a right towards men, but a duty towards the Creator, and a duty precedent both in order of time and degree of obligation to the claims of civil society. It has been over 230 years since that small group of colonial lawyers led a revolution and launched what they viewed as a great experiment, establishing a society fundamentally different than anything that had come before. They crafted a magnificent charter of freedom, the United States Constitution, which provides for limited government while leaving the people broadly at liberty to pursue their lives both as individuals and through their free associations. This quantum leap in liberty has been the mainspring of unprecedented human progress, not only for Americans, but for people around the world.
A quantum leap in liberty. We'll come back and listen to a little bit more of this. Actually, we're going to listen to the whole speech. I'm making a command decision. I've got time to do it this hour. In the first segment of next hour, we're going to listen to the whole thing. Because I think if you know anything about religious liberty, you know it's under attack. You know, that's why I support Alliance Defending Freedom. It's why I raise money for them every October. It's why I urge you to head over to Alliance Defending Freedom banner at the top of HughHewitt.com. ADF is the #1 legal defense fund for religious liberty in the United States. You can call them at 866-700-1060, 866-700-1060, 866-700-1060. Go and do that today. Please don't wait another day, and go and help Alliance Defending Freedom when I come back. And Bill Barr has taken so many slings and arrows over this speech. I mean, really, slings and arrows over this speech you would not believe. Everyone calling him everything because he's out there talking about what most Americans take as a matter-of-fact statement, that we are free and absolutely protected in our religious beliefs and our free exercise of those beliefs. God bless Bill Barr for standing up for this, and at Notre Dame for having him to do so. We'll play more of this important speech when we come back. We got Michael Oren calling in from Israel this morning, Admiral Stavridis, Dr. Larry Arnn. Lots ahead, but Bill Barr first on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Lethal Agent, a Mitch Rapp novel by Kyle Mills.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I am playing for you Admiral William Barr's amazing speech at Notre Dame over the weekend on Saturday. Here is cut number 3 talking about how religious liberty triumphed over communism in the 20th century.
In the 20th century, our form of free society faced a severe test. There's always been the question whether a democracy so solicitous of individual freedom could stand up against the regimented totalitarian state. That question was answered with a resounding yes, as the United States stood up against and defeated first fascism and then communism. But in the 21st century, we face an entirely different kind of challenge. The challenge we face is precisely what the Founding Fathers foresaw would be the supreme test of a free society. They never thought that the main danger to the Republic would come from external foes. The central question was whether, over the long haul, we the people could handle freedom. The question was whether the citizens in such a free society could maintain the moral discipline and virtue necessary for the survival of free institutions. By and large, the founding generation's view of human nature was drawn from the classical Christian tradition. These practical statesmen understood that individuals, while having the potential for great good, also had the capacity for great evil. Men are subject to powerful passions and appetites, and if unrestrained, are capable of ruthlessly riding roughshod over their neighbors and the community at large. No society can exist without some means of restraining individual rapacity. But if you rely on the coercive power of the government to impose those restraints, the framers believed, this would inevitably lead to a government that is too controlling, and you would end up with no liberty, just tyranny. On the other hand, unless you had some effective restraint, you end up with something equally dangerous: licentiousness, the unbridled pursuit of personal appetites at the expense of the common good. This is just another form of tyranny, where the individual is enslaved by his appetites and the possibility of any healthy community life crumbles. Edmund Burke summed up this point in his typically colorful language. Men are qualified for civil liberty in exact proportion to their disposition to put chains upon their own appetites. Society cannot exist unless a controlling power be placed somewhere, and the less of it there is within, the more of it there must be without.
He continued, cut number 4.
So the founders decided to take a gamble, and they called it a great experiment. They would leave the people broad liberty, they would limit the coercive power of the government, and they would place their trust in the self-discipline and virtue of the American people. In the words of Madison, we have staked our future on the ability of each of us to govern ourselves. And this is really what they meant by self-government. It did not mean primarily the mechanics by which we select a representative legislature. It referred to the capacity of each individual to restrain and govern themselves. But what was the source of this internal controlling power? In a free republic, those restraints could not be handed down from above by philosopher kings. Instead, social order must flow up from the people themselves, freely obeying the dictates of inwardly possessed and commonly shared moral values. And to control willful human beings with an infinite capacity to rationalize, those moral values must rest on authority independent of men's wills.
That's it, on authority independent of men's wills. It's like the key line, authority independent of men's will. Where does that come from? It can come from the Constitution, but the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are inevitably linked to religious liberty. Support religious liberty by giving to Alliance Defending Freedom. The banner is over at HughHewitt.com. More of Attorney General Barr's talk after the break. During the break, you can call 866-700-1060, 866-700-1060 to help Alliance Defending Freedom keep winning battles for you. Support Bill Barr, Alliance Defending Freedom. I'll be right back on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network Foundation.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Elijah Cummings has died. Vice President Pence, Mike Pompeo are in Ankara, Turkey, along with National Security Advisor O'Brien to negotiate with Turkey. And we note as well that Brexit has been negotiated. There is a deal. Boris Johnson has done it. We will learn more about that on Saturday if the British Parliament votes for it. But let's go from the breaking news to Bill Barr speaking at Notre Dame on Saturday in a speech that everyone in America simply needs to hear. He's talking about religious liberty. And I remind you, Alliance Defending Freedom banner is over at hughhewitt.com. That's what he's talking about. Go support them during this speech. Cut number 5.
Well, how does religion promote moral discipline and the virtue needed to sustain free government? Well, first, it gives us rules to live by. The founding generation were Christians, and they believed that the Judeo-Christian moral system corresponds to the true nature of man. And those rules speak to man and fulfill man both in his private spiritual life and in his communal life. Those moral precepts start, of course, in Christianity with the two great commandments: to love God with your whole heart, soul, and mind, and to love thy neighbor as thyself. But they also include the guidance of natural law, a real transcendent moral order which flows from God's eternal law, the divine wisdom by which the whole of creation is ordered. The eternal law is impressed upon and reflected in all created things. And from the nature of things we can, through reason and experience, discern standards of right and wrong that exist independent of human will. Now, modern secularists dismiss this idea of morality as sort of otherworldly superstition imposed by a killjoy clergy. But in fact, Judeo-Christian moral standards are the ultimate utilitarian rules for human conduct. They reflect the rules that are best for man, not in the by and by, but in the here and now. They are like God's instruction manual for the best running of man and the best operation of human society. And by the same token, violations of these moral laws have bad real-world consequences for man and for society. We may not pay the price immediately, but over time, the harm is real. Religion also helps promote moral discipline within society. We're all fallen. We don't automatically conform our conduct to moral rules, even when we know that they are good for us. But religion helps teach, train, and habituate people to want what is good. It does not do this primarily by formal laws, that is, by coercive power. It does this through moral education and by framing society's informal rules, the customs and traditions which reflect the wisdom and experience of the ages. In other words, religion helps frame a moral culture within society that instills and reinforces moral discipline.
And he went on to then talk about how religion has been under attack for a half century. Cut number 6.
I think we all recognize, that over the past 50 years, religion has been under increasing attack. On the one hand, we have seen the steady erosion of our traditional Judeo-Christian moral system and a comprehensive effort to drive it from the public square. On the other hand, we see the growing ascendancy of secularism and the doctrine of moral relativism. By any honest assessment, the consequences of this moral upheaval have been grim. Virtually every measure of social pathology continues to gain ground. In 1965, the illegitimacy rate was 8%. The last time I was Attorney General, in 1992, it was at 25%. Today, it is at over 40%, and that's the national average. In many of our large urban areas, as we know, it is well over 70%. Along with the wreckage of the family, we are seeing record levels of depression and mental illness, dispirited young people, soaring suicide rates, increasing numbers of angry and alienated young males, an increase in senseless violence, and a deadly drug epidemic. As you know, over 70,000 people die a year from drug overdoses. That is more casualties in a year than we experienced during the entire Vietnam War. I won't dwell on the bitter results of the new secular age. Suffice it to say that the campaign to destroy the traditional moral order has coincided, and I believe has brought with it immense suffering and misery. And yet the forces of secularism, ignoring these tragic results, press on with even greater militancy.
They do, and he talks, where is the progress the progressives promise? Cut number 7 of Bill Barr.
Among the militant secularists are many so-called progressives. But where is the progress? We are told we are living in a post-Christian era. But what has replaced the Judeo-Christian moral system? What is it that can fill the spiritual void in the hearts of the individual person? And what is the system of values that can sustain human social life? The fact is that no secular creed has emerged capable of performing the role of religion. Scholarship suggests that religion has been integral to the development and thriving of Homo sapiens since we emerged roughly 50,000 years ago. And it is just for the past few hundred years that we've embarked on this experiment of living without religion. We hear much today about our humane values, but in the final analysis, what undergirds these values? What commands our adherence to them? What we call values today is really nothing more than mere sentimentality, still drawing on the vapor trails of Christianity. Now, there have been times and places where the traditional moral order has been shaken in the past. In the past, societies like the human body seem to have a self-healing mechanism, a self-correcting mechanism that gets things back on course if things go too far. The consequences of moral chaos become too pressing. The opinion of decent people rebels. They coalesce and rally against obvious excess. Periods of moral retrenchment follow periods of excess. This is the idea of the pendulum. And we've all thought to ourselves, after a while, the pendulum will swing back. But today we face something different that may mean that we cannot count on the pendulum swinging back. First is the force, fervor, and comprehensiveness of the assault on organized religion we are experiencing today. This is not decay. This is organized destruction. Secularists and their allies have marshaled all the forces of mass communication, popular culture, the entertainment industry, and academia in an unremitting assault on religion and traditional values. These instruments are used not only to affirmatively promote secular orthodoxy, but also to drown out and silence opposing voices and to attack viciously and hold up to ridicule any dissidents.
Went on to say then, the irony is that secularism dominates everything. Cut number 8, the most important cut.
One of the ironies, as some have observed, is that the secular project has itself become a religion pursued with religious fervor. It is taking on all the trappings of religion, including inquisitions and excommunication. Those who defy the creed risk a figurative burning at the stake, social, educational, and professional ostracism and exclusion waged through lawsuits and savage social media campaigns. The pervasiveness and the power of our high-tech popular culture fuels apostasy in other ways. It provides an unprecedented degree of distraction. Part of the human condition has been that there usually has been no way to avoid the big questions that stare us in the face. Are we created, or are we purely material accidents? Does our life have any meaning or purpose? But as Blaise Pascal observed, instead of grappling with these questions, many human beings are easily distracted from thinking about the final things. And indeed, we now live in the age of distraction, where we can envelop ourselves in a world of digital stimulation and universal connectivity. And we have almost limitless ways of indulging all our physical appetites. There's another modern phenomenon that is suppressing society's self-corrective mechanism that's making it harder for us to restore ourselves. In the past, when societies are threatened by moral chaos, the overall social costs of licentiousness and irresponsible personal conduct become so high that society ultimately recoils and reevaluates the path it is on. But today, in the face of all the increasing pathologies, instead of addressing the underlying cause, we have cast the state in the role of the alleviator of bad consequences. We call on the state to mitigate the social costs of personal misconduct and irresponsibility. So the reaction to growing illegitimacy is not sexual responsibility, but abortion. The reaction to drug addiction is safe injection sites. The solution to the breakdown of the family is for the state to set itself up as an ersatz husband for the single mother and an ersatz father for the children. The call comes for more and more social programs to deal with this wreckage. And while we think we're solving problems, we are underwriting them.
While I'm away, I have no idea what the price of gold's going to be doing. Everything is going crazy in this world, and when things get crazier, gold goes up. But I've been telling you for weeks, I'll be telling you for months, I'll be telling for you for years. You ought to diversify into gold and silver. You ought to own some of precious metal yourself in your safety deposit box, somewhere where it's safe, or you ought to be taking some of your IRA and your 401k and making sure that it's backed by precious metals. The way to do that, birchgold.com. You can move your IRA, your 401k out of risky stocks and bonds as the market tops and into a precious metals IRA. You want to find out how? There's a free 16-page kit available to you from birchgold.com if you will simply text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. Again, text Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747 or go to birchgold.com/Hugh, birchgold.com/Hugh. Get some precious metals. Get them today, birchgold.com/Hugh. Time now for relieffactor.com, my daily reminder. Even when I am out of the country and traveling, I like to remind people in the country and listening, especially those of you who are commuting this morning, that relieffactor.com is your friend. And if you've got an ache and pain this morning, you wish you had taken it, well, today is the day to go to relieffactor.com and order the starter pack. I yammer at you every single day, 3 times a day, at the same time every hour, that you ought to have taken your Relief Factor. Now, part of that is just to remind the tens of thousands of you who already have it, not to leave the house without it. But part of it is also to nudge some of you, especially my new markets that are added on every week, that relieffactor.com really does work. Like Carrion and Curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, the 4 natural supplements widely recognized as doctors as necessary to your good health. It really does work. It really has taken all the guesswork out of it, all the engineering out of it, perfectly designed. 4 supplements, easy to swallow. I take them every day. You ought to join the tens of thousands of people who do as well. relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. Get started today.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt on this Thursday morning. Elijah Cummings, who has passed, celebrating the new Brexit deal Boris Johnson has delivered, and generally saying, you've got to listen to this William Barr speech, and I'll continue. He was at Notre Dame on Saturday. Let's go back to it.
Finely tuned moral sensibilities by participating in demonstrations on this cause or on that. Something happened recently that crystallized this difference between these competing moral systems. I was attending Mass at a parish I did not usually attend in Washington, D.C. And at the end of Mass, the chairman of the Social Justice Committee got up to give his report to the parish. And he pointed to the growing homeless problem in D.C. and explained that more mobile soup kitchens were needed to feed them. This being a Catholic church, I expected him to call for volunteers to go out and provide for this need as volunteers. But instead, he recounted all the visits that the committee members had made to the D.C. government to lobby for higher taxes and more spending to fund mobile soup kitchens. A third phenomenon which makes it difficult for the pendulum to swing back is the way the law is being used as a battering ram to break down traditional moral values and to establish moral relativism as the new orthodoxy. Law is being used in a couple of ways. First, either through legislation, but more frequently through judicial interpretation, the forces of secularism have been continually seeking to eliminate laws that reflect traditional moral norms. At first, this involved rolling back laws that prohibited certain kinds of conduct, hence the watershed decision legalizing abortion, and since then the legalization of euthanasia, and the list goes on, as we all know. More recently, we have seen the law used aggressively to force religious people and entities to subscribe to practices and policies that are antithetical to their faith. The problem is not that religion is being forced on others. The problem is that irreligion is being forced. Secular values are being forced on people of faith.
Exactly right. Final cut for this hour. Number 10, Bill Barr at Notre Dame on Saturday.
This reminds me of the way Roman emperors just couldn't leave the minority of Christians in the empire alone, although they were loyal to the emperor. They couldn't leave them in peace. They would mandate that they had to violate their conscience by offering religious sacrifice to the emperor as a god. Similarly today, Militant secularists do not have a live and let live spirit. They are not content to leave religious people alone to practice their faith. Instead, they seem to take delight in compelling people to violate their conscience. For example, the last administration sought to force religious employers, including Catholic religious orders, to violate their sincerely held religious views by funding contraceptive and abortifacient coverage in their health plans. And similarly, recently, California has sought to require pro-life pregnancy centers to provide notices of abortion rights. This refusal to accommodate the free exercise of religion is relatively recent. Just 25 years ago, there was a broad consensus in our society that our laws should accommodate religious belief. In 1993, Congress passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The purpose of the statute was to promote maximum accommodation to religion when the government adopted broad policies that might impinge on religious practice. And at the time, this was not controversial. It was introduced by Chuck Schumer with 170 co-sponsors in the House, and was introduced by Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch with 59 co-sponsors in the Senate, and it passed the Senate by 97-3. But recently, as the process of secularization has accelerated, this statute has come under assault, and the idea of religious accommodation is falling out of favor. Because this administration firmly supports accommodation of religion, the battleground at this time has largely shifted to the states. Some state governments are now attempting to compel religious individuals and entities to subscribe to practices or to espouse viewpoints that are incompatible with their religion. Ground zero for these attacks on religion are the schools, and to me, this is the most serious challenge to religious liberty today. For anyone who has a religious faith, by far the most important part of exercising that faith is teaching that religion to your children, the passing on of the faith. There is no greater gift we can give our children and no greater expression of love. And for the government to interfere in that process is a monstrous invasion of religious liberty.
A monstrous invasion of religious liberty. To prevent that, keep listening. I'll play the conclusion of the Barr speech at the top of the second hour of today's Thursday show. I remind you that Alliance Defending Freedom does this every day, everywhere in every state. You can go support them over at HughHewitt.com. The banner Alliance Defending Freedom is at the top. You can call right now, 866-700-1060. Big day. Brexit is back. Boris Johnson wins. And I will tell you about that and talk with Stavridis and Michael Oren and Jim Talent in the next hour, Larry Arnn in the third, as we return to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 8 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 15 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds.
Everybody likes the cover.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
All right, it's Hugh Hewitt. I'm still in España. This time I don't even have to ask Dwayne how to pronounce it for me. I'm not there. I'm not going to be there all week. But guess who is? Kurt Schlichter. He's back. The Colonel is up. Now, this is the third day he's done this in a row. So he's getting a little grumpy, kind of barking a little bit at Dwayne, like the old days when the soldiers would say, "Stay away, Colonel Kurt's in a bad mood." Well, friends, wake up, sit up, listen closely, because Colonel Kurt Schlichter is here. Listen in.
Thank you, Hugh Hewitt. He is correct. I am Kurt Schlichter, retired United States Army Colonel, senior columnist at townhall.com, and a noted Los Angeles trial lawyer. But I am not grumpy. I say again, I am not grumpy. Instead, I am enthusiastic. I am cheerful. I am happy. Al-Baghdadi is dead, and it was the United States Army that did it. Take that, SEALs. My beloved Army avenged itself upon those murderous bastards. They're gone. They're dead. But there is something to worry about. That's right. America is praying for the recovery of our glorious war dog. You know, if you got on Twitter yesterday and you ignored the liberals, which you should always do, you should always ignore the liberals who are trying to find a reason why. Well, you know, maybe it's not so good this terrorist monster got the payback he deserved. Most conservatives were out there going, how's the dog? Is the dog okay? Is the dog going to be okay? Mr. President, please let America know that this dog is going to be taken care of. But I want to get right into it, because we've got Salena Zito here, and she's got her finger on the pulse of America. Hi, Salena. How's America feel about the death of this terrorist?
Good morning, Kurt. Thanks so much for having me on. You know, I don't think most normal people are relieved and, you know, celebrating a little bit that someone who caused so much terror, so much death, so much torture, not only within his country, but, you know, tried to spread it across the world. It's sort of like that childhood chant, ding dong, the witch is dead, the wicked witch, the dirty old witch. It's kind of like that.
Well, you know, Salena, I kind of come at this from a Jacksonian perspective by way of Scipio Africanus and Carthage. Yesterday, my beautiful wife Irina started reading me the kind of tortures this monster inflicted on Kayla Mueller, an American woman who fell into his clutches before he murdered her. And I had to stop. I'm a tough guy. I said, honey, you got to stop. I can't hear anymore. I'm glad he's dead. I'm glad we did it. God bless the United States. And everybody, say a prayer for our troops and say a prayer for that heroic war dog.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the American people are so relieved that nothing happened to any of the men that went in there, and and that they were able to precisely execute this without any casualties is a testament to the resolve and to the professionalism of the American soldier.
Well, Salena Zito, so many of the Americans who make up our military come from the kind of people that you, alone of the mainstream media, really seem to be, almost alone, seem to be interested in. Those Americans who don't live in Washington, D.C. or New York City or in my own home of Los Angeles. In the wake of the pullout from northern Syria, combined with this, does it seem that Donald Trump is becoming more in line with the American people, the flyover country, for lack of a better words, feeling about war? We don't want to be involved in foreign conflicts, but you kill an American, we're going to hunt you down.
That's exactly right. So what has transpired in the past 2.5 weeks in foreign policy coming from this White House is the fulfillment of campaign promise. The campaign promise was created because President Trump understood the sentiments of the American people, in particular, obviously, the ones that voted for him. But to pull out of the endless wars was not only something that he promised, but it was something that people cheered. I mean, you can go back and look at the and listen to the audio of his campaign rallies. People cheered when he said that. They also cheered when he said, we're going to get the terrorists. You can do both things. And that's what he believes he is accomplishing by pulling out of Syria, but also not letting the bad guys get away with anything. I think it's fascinating, honestly. I was thinking about this because I was driving from Georgia to Tennessee yesterday, and I was thinking about, he knew this was going down for the past 2.5 weeks. In the same time, he was taking so much criticism for what he was going to do in Syria. And yet he never showed his hand, which is one of the deep criticisms of him. And I think that also is something we should reflect upon, because that shows a different side of Trump. He is both planning the capture of this terrorist, this monster, while taking troops out of Syria. I don't think people have contemplated sort of the depth of that.
It just seems bizarre to me that a real estate developer from Queens, who's a billionaire, understands what the American people are really about better than the American people's own ruling class.
Well, here's the other thing I want to point out, because this is all Twitter is going to talk about today, which is why I avoid Twitter more and more often. He didn't take his son to the game, and he was booed. Well, number one, he didn't take his son to the game because he knew he was going to be booed. And why would you put your kid through that? That's a good parent. That's not a bad parent.
I think it's a little. Were you as shocked as I was that in a town where 95% of the people voted for his opponent, the fans didn't like him?
Oh, he's in on the joke. He knew he was going to get booed. It's when he gets booed in Ashtabula, Ohio, that he's got a problem.
Isn't it almost a badge of honor, Salena Zito? He goes out to Minnesota, which I think he's going to swing to the Republicans. It says, they booed me in Washington. Is that going to make him less popular?
no, it's probably going to bring more people to his event because it just sort of underlines or underscores exactly the disconnect that happens in the country. He knew they were going to boo him, and that's first of all why he didn't bring his kid. I can't believe the people that are freaking out that he didn't bring his kid. I'm sorry, would you bring your kid to something you knew without any doubt was going to be you were going to be booed? That's cruel to do to a child. And he didn't do it. I say applaud him for it.
Maybe Barron just doesn't like baseball. I famously never go see games. And producer Dwayne in there, he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand.
Well, I love baseball.
I know. Look, I'm not judging others. I'm just saying, hey, this is how I come down. But,
it was also a school night.
That's right.
It's also a school night. But let me ask you something. Wait, there's this disconnect with kind of our ruling class, and I don't think anybody disconnects more than Katie Hill and Katie Hill's bizarre lifestyle, which was revealed over the last week by a friend of the show, Jen Van Laar, reporting at Red State. And Katie Hill has resigned. How is the Katie Hill scandal going to play with regular folks?
Well, I think that, people might say, well, okay, you do what you want to do in your private life. Okay, that's weird, but okay. But you filmed it. You took pictures of it. You posted it. Okay, that's just,
creepy?
No.
Horrifying? Well, those are a few good adjectives. Salena Zito, a friend of the show is running in the 25th District. Mike Garcia, former Navy fighter pilot, family man, solid citizen, somebody you might want to talk to in the future.
Absolutely.
Do you think that these kind of normal Americans like Mike going up against kind of the freak show elements of the Dems that we've seen, how do you feel a year out that we're going to do in the House as Republicans? And you got about 15 seconds.
There's been some great recruits, including him, to run for the House. And I think the Republicans are going to do much better than they did in 2018. And there's a strong possibility they can take back the House. That's not just happy talk.
Well, that's great news, Salena Zito. I'm Kurt Schlichter, guest hosting for Hugh Hewitt. We'll be right back.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
We're back. Back on the Hugh Hewitt radio program. I'm guest host Kurt Schlichter, senior columnist for Town Hall, noted trial lawyer, retired United States Army colonel, husband of the beautiful Irina. And that's her favorite song. And it's dedicated to her because she is up at Dark 30 listening. In between editing my next book, Collapse, the novel, the fourth in the Kelly Turnbull series that was hailed by Bill Crystal as appalling. Ahoy, everybody. Well, yeah, yesterday was Sunday. We did our normal Sunday morning routine. We went off to church. I being California, I went and I got my church shorts and church flip-flops, and off we went. You know, for people of faith, it's been a tough time. It's been a tough time in America because we've been under fire. We've been under fire from people who don't respect our beliefs and don't respect our rights. But there's some we can do about it. Alliance Defending Freedom. As we all know, Hugh's been sounding the clarion call on behalf of ADF all this month. Alliance Defending Freedom is a nonprofit legal organization defending religious rights in the marketplace, in schools, on college campuses, everywhere. And not just Christians, but Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, even atheists. The first freedom is for everyone. And when one person's religious freedom is violated, everyone's is. When one person's religious freedom's at risk, everyone's religious freedom is at risk. ADF is now defending over 1,400 open matters in the United States. 1,400, folks. Goes to show how many incidences of religious freedom being in jeopardy are occurring around our country. There's only 4 days left in our campaign to help. So I want to make you a very special offer today. I want to do something for you if you donate. Everyone who makes a tax-deductible gift of $250 or more to Alliance Defending Freedom at the HughHewitt.com banner, it's right at the top, easy to find, we're going to send you a copy of Remembering President Ronald Reagan on CD. It's from Bill Bennett. It's amazing. It's a Salem Radio Network produced CD voiced by Bill Bennett, who was President Reagan's Secretary of Education, with his personal remembrances and interviews with special guests including Gary Bauer, Jack Kemp, Ed Rollins, Ed Meese, Gene Kirkpatrick. These are legends. Look, I was in college during the Reagan years. It was an amazing time. And if you if you didn't experience that, you owe it to yourself. And you owe it to yourself to defend religious liberty. This extra special commemorative Remembering President Ronald Reagan CD will be our gift to you today only if you donate $250 or more to Alliance Defending Freedom by going to the HughHewitt.com page and clicking on the ADF banner right at the top of the homepage. Do it today. I want to tell you a little about Job Creators Network. Look, there's a lot of talk in Washington about healthcare. A lot of talk. A lot of it's nonsense. Progressive Democrats are making big plans, promising to make everything better and cheaper, which is, of course, what they were supposed to do with our present system, a.k.a. Obamacare. Heck, they want to even make healthcare free, which, of course, means you and me pay for people who don't want to work. Now, we've been here before. The last time politicians passed a big healthcare bill, we were promised we'd save $2,500 a year and keep our plans and our doctors, and it was called Obamacare, and now they're screaming that we need to replace it without mentioning that it's the program they jammed down our throats in the first place. Look, the numbers don't lie. In 2019, 37% of counties across America had access to only one health insurer as part of healthcare exchanges. Individual premiums have increased 123% since 2013, and family plan premiums have risen an astonishing 174%. There's a reason lobbyists, bureaucrats, politicians are making decisions that determine what care you get, not you. That's the bad news. Here's the good news. There's a movement in this country to put you back in charge of your health care. And doctors and healthcare professionals, along with you, making your own decisions. How can you play your part? Go to healthcareforyou.com and share your story of how red tape and bureaucrats have impacted you and your family. Share your Obamacare stories at healthcareforyou.com. Try and keep them FCC compliant, people. I know you're angry, and you got reason to be. You should be in charge of your healthcare. You should be in charge of your family's healthcare. After all, it's your money. It's your lives. It's your health. Go to healthcareforyou.com and share your story. And stick around here on the Hugh Hewitt radio program. I'm guest host Kurt Schlichter. Coming up next, the great Florida Senator Rick Scott, right here. Don't go away.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network Foundation.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Run away with me. Lost soul to reverie.
And we're back on the Hugh Hewitt radio program. This is Kurt Schlichter, guest hosting for the great Hugh Hewitt, who is somewhere in Spain, probably drowning his sorrows in sangria. No, I don't think he drinks. I don't think Hugh drinks. Although I do have a story of how he came to my cavalry ball, and I had a Stetson, and you make grog in it. And hey, what happens in a cavalry ball stays in a cavalry ball. Me, I'm guest host Kurt Schlichter, retired United States Army colonel, senior columnist at Town Hall, a noted Los Angeles trial lawyer, and it is my distinct honor to have one of my favorite people from Washington on the line with me, Senator Rick Scott of Florida. How are you, Senator Scott?
Good morning, Kurt. You know, I don't think around the country people are very happy with people from Washington. So I always want to say I'm from Florida. Happen to be up here trying to help Floridians and Americans all across the world. But boy, people are fed up with this federal government.
Well, we call that TDY in the military. Let me ask you something. Every time I've talked to you before guest hosting for Hugh Hewitt, every time I ask you, I plead with you, will you please come out here to California and be my senator?
It would actually be, I like to fix things. Gosh, wouldn't that be fun? I mean, California is such a beautiful place, but boy, right now, based on its politics, it's a real fixer-upper.
Well, that's the miracle of socialism, Senator Rick Scott. It can take a place like California with beautiful natural resources, amazing people, a legacy of achievement, and turn it into Venezuela del Norte.
It's crazy. Why? Stop and think about it. If you want to help the poorest families, I grew up in public housing. Okay, why was I able to get ahead? Because I didn't have all these regulations that I had to deal with. I didn't have all these permitting to where who's it help? It doesn't help the poor. It helps the people that have influence. And so we've helped the big companies, but the young person that wants to get started, it takes 15 permits. It takes all these regulations you can't comply with. It takes a bad government attitude, and then we've taxed the living daylights and feed the living daylights out of our population, so where people can't afford to get ahead.
Well, Senator Scott, I'm a trial lawyer out here in Los Angeles, and things are just fine for me. But boy, you go 60 miles inland, and it's an entirely different story. Heck, we don't even have power anymore. It's like we're the third world.
Isn't that something? I mean, you just don't get why. Think about it, Kurt. California has been one of the most beautiful places in the world. You're right. There are wonderful people out there, but they've allowed themselves to go down this path. They have ruined the job market. They have ruined the family. They don't stand up for freedom, the Bill of Rights. How many people in California are sitting there looking at what's going on in Hong Kong and say, we got to stand up for these people. These people are being treated badly by communist China. I mean, you don't see it in the NBA. And did you see Charles Barkley yesterday? Charles Barkley comes out and says, we're not supposed to care about human rights over in Hong Kong or in China. No, we just need to sell more jerseys and shoes.
Oh, it's disgraceful. So many of these people take the freedom we have for granted. But yesterday, our great Army Special Forces, and I, as a veteran of the United States Army, finally taken something, finally it's not the SEALs. It's my guys in the Army going it. What's the feeling back in Washington, D.C. about what happened with Baghdadi and how this plays into our general politics?
First off, I was in the Navy, so the SEALs, I have a special affinity to the SEALs, but my dad was in the 86th Airborne, so I love the Army. First, I want to, first off, aren't you just proud of our military men and women?
So much.
And they did something, they got rid of this guy. Now remember, in Florida, he's the guy that killed the journalist from Florida, Stephen Sotloff. He's the guy that inspired the guy that did the terrorist attack at the Pulse nightclub. So this is a big deal for Floridians. So I'm very proud of the president. I'm very proud of the military that we've taken this fight to ISIS. I'm glad that we worked with the Kurds because they've clearly been our partners to destroy ISIS. I'm disappointed that Turkey is doing what they're doing, invading another country, buying the Russian missile system. So I think we need to keep those sanctions on. But that was a great day for freedom all around the world, not just for America. Anybody that wants freedom and liberty and Bill of Rights.
Well, besides keeping our American military forces in our thoughts and prayers, we all need to say some prayers for that poor war dog who was injured in action.
Yeah.
I know the American people, they're like, I don't care about those jihadi slugs. I want to know that our dog is all right.
Yeah. You just think about it. These dogs are unbelievably well trained, and the military men and women that take care of them love them. And they do some very tough missions.
They're fantastic, just like all our military forces. Look, as a veteran, Senator Scott, you understand the importance of secrecy. Now, President Trump has come in for some criticism because he didn't tell the Democratic leadership in Congress that this mission was going down. And considering the environment of leaks and petty politics and general backbiting and infighting, when you're president, if you were president, would you have told Congress before this mission went down?
I think you think about what you're taking care of. You're taking care of the safety of our men and women. And so if you have any concern that something would get out that would impact their safety, you would never tell anybody. I mean, you do everything you can to keep it a secret. So, look, yesterday, what all Americans should have been doing is say, thank God our men and women are safe. Thank God that Baghdadi is gone. And I mean, this is helping, and thankful for the Kurds for working with us to make this happen. Instead, I can tell you what, Kurt, I've been up here for almost 10 months now. It's all politics. The Democrats just hate Trump. A lot of them won't even talk to me. I mean, they're just hoping I guess I'll go away. But they just hate Trump. They're out to get this guy any which way they can. I mean, this is not about how do you help the country. Because yesterday the country should be celebrating that an arch enemy of the United States is gone.
There should be absolute, unequivocal joy at justice being delivered through the United States Army on this butcher. And there isn't, and I find that bizarre. How do your constituents feel when they look at Washington and they see things like the Washington Post calling this monster an austere scholar of Islam when he has nothing to do with Islam? I mean, I've worked overseas. It's nothing to do with these psychopaths.
So much of the media today, they're anti-American. I mean, why wouldn't the Washington Post, why wouldn't they celebrate what happened? Why wouldn't they? And, you can disagree. Like, look, none of us agree with everybody on everything, but who can't be happy that the guy that killed the Floridian, Stephen Saltlaw, a guy that inspired the shooter at the Pulse nightclub, who couldn't, and so many other things, who can't be happy about that? He's a bad guy. He hates America. And why would you, whether it's calling him a scholar or whether you're complaining that you didn't get called? I mean, Donald Trump right now is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He's the president of the United States. He needs to take care of our military, and he is.
Well, he's doing that with the help of you and other senators who understand how important it is to give our military the resources they need. Do you think you're going to be able to continue to do that and work to, for instance, get ourselves a 355-ship Navy?
Well, we're going to, we passed out of the defense, in the Senate defense budget, we passed out of committee. We passed the biggest budget ever for the military. Now, of course, we came to an agreement at the end of July where we'd raise the debt ceiling, agree to caps, and of course, the Democrats came back from recess and said, no, we're not going to do it. So here's what we're doing right now. We have a continuing resolution, which means we have to spend the money the same way we spent it last year, even though we made the decision in the military that there's some projects we want to discontinue and there's new projects we want to get started. These are the Democrats who, remember, under Obama, cut the living daylights out of the budget for our military because they didn't care about our military men and women. Here's the Democrats that voted against giving our military members a pay raise right now. That was part of this deal, and they stopped it.
Well, it seems like the only thing that the Democrats want to do, Senator Rick Scott, is talk about impeachment. Now, you're one of 100 senators. You're one of 53 Republicans. They need 67 to convict and to remove the president from office. Let me ask you two questions. First, do you believe the House of Representatives under Nancy Pelosi is going to forward articles of impeachment to the Senate? And second question, do you believe there are 20 Republicans who will betray their constituents and vote to remove the president?
Kurt, everything I've been told, they've got the votes. I'm shocked that they're doing it this way, but they've got the votes in the House to impeach. So, and it's supposedly going to happen by Thanksgiving. Now, based on what we know today, I mean, I don't know where the high crimes and misdemeanors are. Not when one person has ever shown me something that where there's a violation of the law. I mean, look, I think everybody's going to take their job seriously. They're going to listen to all the evidence. But if you look at what's out there today, there's no one's shown us that somebody did anything wrong. And it's a three-ring circus over the House. They're ignoring all prior practices in dealing with impeachment. They're making this all private so they can put out whatever they want, but nothing else that would possibly help the president, which is also taints the whole process.
Well, Senator Rick Scott, we only have about 30 seconds left. Let me ask you, is there any way that you believe there would be 67 senators voting to remove the president, which means 20 Republicans betraying their constituents?
Kurt, I don't believe there's any way. There's no, at this point, there's no evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors. I mean, that's the standard.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Rick Scott of the great state of Florida, a favorite here on the Hugh Hewitt radio program. I'm guest host Kurt Schlichter. We are going to be right back.
Thank you, Colonel Kurt. While I'm away, I have no idea what the price of gold's going to be doing. Everything is going crazy in this world, and when things get crazier, gold goes up. But I've been telling you for weeks, I'll be telling you for months, I'll be telling for you for years. You ought to diversify into gold and silver. You ought to own some of precious metal yourself in your safety deposit box, somewhere where it's safe, or you ought to be taking some of your IRA and your 401k and making sure that it's backed by precious metals. The way to do that, birchgold.com. You can move your IRA, your 401k out of risky stocks and bonds as the market tops and into a precious metals IRA. You want to find out how? There's a free 16-page kit available to you from birchgold.com if you will simply text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. Again, text Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747 or go to birchgold.com/Hugh, birchgold.com/Hugh. Get some precious metals. Get them today. Birchgold.com/Hugh. Time now for ReliefFactor.com, my daily reminder. Even when I am out of the country and traveling, I like to remind people in the country and listening, especially those of you who are commuting this morning, that ReliefFactor.com is your friend. And if you've got an ache and pain this morning, you wish you had taken it, well, today is the day to go to ReliefFactor.com and order the starter pack. I yammer at you every single day, 3 times a day, at the same time every hour, that you ought to have taken your Relief Factor. Now, part of that is just to remind the tens of thousands of you already have it, not to leave the house without it. But part of it is also to nudge some of you, especially my new markets that are added on every week, that ReliefFactor.com really does work. Icarian and curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, the 4 natural supplements widely recognized as doctors as necessary to your good health. It really does work. It really has taken all the guesswork out of it, all the engineering out of it, perfectly designed. 4 supplements, easy to swallow. I take them every day. You ought to join the tens of thousands of people who do as well. ReliefFactor.com, ReliefFactor.com. Get started today.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
It's the time of the season.
We're back on the Hugh Hewitt radio program. I'm guest host Kurt Schlichter. And I got my party hat on. I got my party hat on because al-Baghdadi is dead. Although I and most of America are praying for the swift recovery of the heroic war dog injured in disposing of this terrorist monster. Let's hear from our friend of the show, Robert O'Brien, our national security advisor, at cut number 21.
I want to go back to and focus on what happened. I mean, this leader, al-Baghdadi, was the most vicious, cruel man. In my prior job as the hostage envoy, I had a chance to meet the Kasichs and Muellers and Sotlofs and Foleys. I had a chance to speak with Diane Foley this morning. We finally brought justice to a man that beheaded the three Americans, two journalists and a humanitarian worker, and then Kayla Mueller, who was working as a humanitarian, great young American, idealistic young girl. And one of the things that General Milley did is General Milley named the operation, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff named the operation that took down al-Baghdadi after Kayla Mueller.
It is right and proper that we inflict appropriate retribution on those who do evil. There is no reason to make excuses. There is no reason to equivocate. I am glad that he is dead. I am glad that those around him who helped him murder Americans and many, many others have gone to their reward. And I figure their reward's not particularly rewarding now. They were disgusting semi-humans. Good riddance. Now, I'm a retired United States Army colonel. I was not there. I have no inside information on what happened, but let me give you some of my perspective. A lot of this is what we call an information operation. You got kinetic operations. That's when you go in. That's the actual bullets. And you got information operations. That's setting the stage and sending the message. This was kinetic. Oh, they kineticed him good. But this was also an information operation. Look at what happened. Look at the footage we're seeing now. We're seeing guys in black masks picking through the rubble of what was the compound. I'm looking at a lot of those big holes there. Looks to me like they dropped J-dams on it. That's basically a big 2,000-pound bomb. And blew the entire place to little bits after they went in on the mission. So what it looks like is the Army Rangers came in, and again, I don't have any inside information. I'm just working off of what I've seen and what I've heard. Looks like the Army Rangers came in and secured the perimeter. Looks like the Delta Force went in to either capture or kill this guy. Now, why don't we just bomb the place? Because then you don't know if he's dead. Okay? You either grab him, or you put a bullet in his head, or if he blows himself up, you go and you dip your swab in the pile of goo that used to be al-Baghdadi, and you take it back and you analyze it, because we probably went and found his relatives and got his DNA. We know what his DNA looks like. So anyway, there's a fight in the compound. There's some there's some YouTube stuff out there, supposedly filmed there, with helicopters firing machine guns or trying to suppress the enemy, killing anybody above ground. He goes underground with 3 of his kids, starts running, and of course it's a dead end because jihadism is a dead end. What an appropriate way to die. And knowing he's about to be captured, he offs himself and his 3 kids because that's the kind of cowardly scumbag he is. Now, why was it so important that the president talked about his whimpering and cowardice? Information. Because we want to destroy the myth of al-Baghdadi. He wasn't a hero having a brave last stand. This wasn't the Alamo. This wasn't Rorke's Drift. This wasn't the Chosin Reservoir. This was a coward running away. And instead of allowing himself to be captured and brought to justice through trial, he killed himself and his kids. That's the kind of semi-human he was. And Donald Trump made sure he knew it. Now, lots of liberal media types are out there wetting themselves. Yeah, these retired generals. Oh, it's terrible that we're doing this. Is so wrong. Look what we did with Osama bin Laden. We treated his corpse with respect. That was the first mistake. What has that gained us in the last 8 years? Have any of our enemies said, I was going to kill Americans, but you treated Osama's body with some respect, so I'm not going to. No. He's scum. He's a disgrace. He's a disgrace to other Muslims. They hate him more than anybody because he's butchered more of them than anybody else. His rotting, maggot-infested corpse should have been thrown in a pigsty. And we should have filmed it, and we should have shown them this is the fate of terrorists. If you want to murder others, if you want to be a butcher, if you want to be a serial rapist, here is where you end up. In the muck with the hogs. Because you're garbage. Don't let him be a hero. Don't let him be a martyr. Show him for what he is. The president did that. The president gets that. The president sent the message. Look at his compound. After we cleared it and took the intel, we leveled it. That's the message the president sent. This is your fate. Smoking ruins and a rotting corpse. Good riddance. This is Kurt Schlichter, guest hosting for the Hugh Hewitt Show. I'll be back at the top of the hour with Victoria Coates.
Don't forget to sign up for the Hughiverse. All of Hugh's broadcasts on demand, the after show, which in my opinion is worth the price all by itself, Dwayne FM, and all sorts of bonus content. www.hughiverse.com.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 8 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 15 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
All right, Hugh Hewitt. I'm still in España. This time I don't even have to ask Dwayne how to pronounce it for me. I'm not there. I'm not going to be there all week. But guess who is? Kurt Schlichter. He's back. The Colonel is up. Now, this is the third day he's done this in a row. So he's getting a little grumpy, kind of barking a little bit at Dwayne, like the old days when the soldiers would say, "Stay away, Colonel Kurt's in a bad mood." Well, friends, wake up, sit up, listen closely, because Colonel Kurt Schlichter is here. Listen in.
Thank you, Hugh Hewitt. This is Kurt Schlichter. I'm back guest hosting on the Hugh Hewitt radio program here on the Salem Media Network. I'm a retired United States Army colonel. I am a noted Los Angeles trial lawyer, and I am the senior columnist Town Hall, and I am very, very honored here today to have Victoria Coates, Deputy National Security Advisor for Mideast and North Africa at the National Security Council. Victoria, how are you this morning?
Good morning, Kurt. Good to be with you.
Let's get right to it. How about those great Army Special Forces, including the War Dogs? My God, aren't they the best?
I mean, what a weekend it was. And I have a little bit of breaking news for you, which is I checked in on the dog before we came on air, and I can report that he's recovered from his wounds and he's back at work taking it to the terrorists.
You're kidding. Oh, that is the greatest news. I got to tell you, Americans across the country, once they found out that our troops were okay, their number one concern was that brave war dog.
They're just amazing animals. They're just incredible. And, you know, all they want is to be doing their job. They're very highly trained and a huge asset to us.
Well, I had the privilege of leading American soldiers for 27 years, both active and reserve, deployed and back here at home. And I know you and the entire administration loves our troops, and that you don't risk them without a very good reason. And I want to move on to this. The president directed that we move many of our forces out of northeast Syria about 2 weeks ago, and there was a big controversy about it. And the president has explained that this wasn't necessarily related to what was happening in West Syria, where al-Baghdadi was eventually killed. Did the impression that the media gave that America was completely abandoning Syria help lull the terrorists of ISIS into a false sense of security that helped allow us to get the jump on them?
Well, it may have. I mean, I think that the interpretation of the president's direction was pretty misguided across the board. The couple of dozen of folks we had up in the Northeast were not there to fight the Turkish military. They were there for a very specific counterterrorism mission, which the president had directed. And when that mission was imperiled by the Turkish move, I mean, he had no choice as commander-in-chief but to move them out of harm's way. So I don't understand why that's so hard for people to figure out.
Well, Victoria Coates of the National Security Council, you feel my pain. The famous Normandy line that the president mentioned came from a column I wrote. I'm a United States Army War College graduate. I was talking about alliances and how having a single shared objective in one discrete location, which we did with the northern Syrian Kurds against ISIS, is a little different than having an enduring and ongoing alliance. And of course, that was completely misinterpreted. As a national security professional, how do you feel dealing with people who, even Ben Rhodes, the notorious Obama security advisor, pointed out are mostly 27-year-olds who have never done nothing but get a gender studies degree and then go to Washington and start scribbling for the internet?
Well, I mean, we're very fortunate to have these jobs, and you rightly point out you have many fans on the National Security Council staff reading your columns. But you know, this is our work. This is what we do. You know, and I'm not here to cast aspersions on my predecessors. You know,
I'll do that for you. I'll take up that cudgel. It's nice to be retired.
But no, I mean, we get up, we do our jobs. You know, we're at the president's direction trying to keep the American people safe. And, you know, the reason I'm on your show is it's also our job to communicate to the American people why we're doing what we're doing. And that can be a little frustrating sometimes, but it is part of the job.
Under Robert O'Brien, who's a big friend of the show, I know him personally as a fellow Los Angeles lawyer. He's extremely respected, a brilliant guy, and just a wonderful American. But he's taking the National Security Council in kind of a different direction. We had very high-profile people, and I'm a big supporter of John Bolton and some of the others. But National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien is shrinking the council back to what appears to be a more manageable size, and he's kind of stepping into the background and focusing more on the advisor role than the voice role. How is that going to affect policy going forward?
Well, as you know, I mean, Robert is just doing, I mean, his dear friend, and he's doing an absolutely fantastic job. One of the things that had happened at the NSC is a lot of sort of duplicative elements had been created to address specific problems, but when the problem was resolved, the element kind of endured, and so we've wound up in a kind of a less than perfectly efficient status. And so I think he saw a lot of opportunities to remove some of these elements, get some things back out to the departments and agencies that are actually staffed and funded to fill these roles, and that we really focus on our core mission, which is to advise the president and then to implement his policy.
Well, Victoria Coates, strategic leadership is about making choices. It's about looking at various potential objectives, selecting one or more, and prioritizing them. It looks to me as an outsider, and I'm not involved in the policymaking process, but it looks to me like the president is prioritizing something else over some of these kind of brushfire war conflicts. Is that priority the rise of the conventional threat from China?
Well, certainly China is, I think, our single long-term strategic challenge. And you know my colleague Matt Pottinger is one of the great China experts on the NSC, and we're all very, very, very pleased to be working with him on that challenge. Many of our short-term challenges, of course, are in the Middle East, starting with Iran. And so we have to walk and chew gum. We've got to keep our eye on the long term. We've got to make sure we're getting after the short-term problems. And that's really where the president is focused, on these major strategic threats to the United States.
Well, look, China is a strategic competitor at best and maybe an active threat at worst. And it looks to me like the president is doing kind of a multi-track approach, diplomatically working with potential allies in Southeast Asia, information-wise, supporting the freedom movement in Hong Kong and maybe eventually on the mainland itself. Militarily or economically, obviously, he's going and finally confronting China on trade, which no one seemed willing to do before. But militarily, let me throw out something, get your evaluation as a professional. And I know you focused on Mideast and Asia, but this is important. It looks to me like China's rise was targeted towards asymmetric abilities to counter American strength. For instance, anti-ballistic missile or ballistic missiles targeting our carriers. But now it looks like China's trying to match us in our carriers and our other conventional forces. Do you think it's an error for China to move? It is objectively an error for China to move away from asymmetrically balancing us to actually trying to match us.
Well, I do think there is really no limit to China's ambitions. Fortunately, they have a pretty long way to go before they match us, and one of the most important directives the president's had has been the rebuilding of our military. And as you know, NSA O'Brien is deeply interested in that, particularly the Navy, and that is a generational project that we're going to have to keep after. Hopefully our successors will see the need for it as urgently as we do. And in terms of China more broadly, I mean, one of the things that's so critical about the Middle East is if you're concerned about China or Russia, for example, that's where they're both present. You know, they're not pivoting away from the Middle East. They're not withdrawing from it, and so we can't either. And certainly I think the president's moves in Saudi Arabia over the last couple of weeks demonstrate that he's very conscious of that as well.
Well, we know that China is aggressively, diplomatically, and economically, and even informationally engaging in Africa. Do you see, as America winds down some of its Middle Eastern interventions, do you see China actually deploying expeditionary forces, and it's building some of those capabilities, to the Middle East, to Africa, so that we see Chinese boots on the ground in those regions for the first time? And we've got about 14 seconds.
Okay. Well, just very quickly then, I mean, we see less of a military presence, more of an economic presence, and that's what we're going to work very, very hard to counter.
Well, I think it's very important that we use all elements of national power. We called it DIME, Diplomatic Information, Military and Economic, in the Army War College, which, of course, was a party war college, so I'm surprised I remember any of it. This is Kurt Schlichter. I'm guest hosting on the Hugh Hewitt radio program. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network Foundation.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Oh yeah, we are back on the Hugh Hewitt radio program. I'm feeling a hot wind on my shoulder. It's the Santa Anas coming down from the mountains, turning the Southern California into an oven. And then Gavin Newsom's going to turn off all our power because apparently under the Democrats, we've decided to become the third world. Thanks, Gavin. You loser. Hey, we made big news just now here on the Hugh Hewitt radio program. I'm guest host Kurt Schlichter, retired United States Army colonel, noted trial lawyer, senior columnist at Town Hall. And Victoria Coates of the National Security Council informed us that the hero war dog who was injured in the attack on al-Baghdadi's compound, that hero war dog is going to be all right. He's apparently back on duty. So those thoughts and prayers for our heroic war dog, they worked. Now, look, a lot of liberals like to make fun of the idea of prayer. They think that religious people are some kind of joke. And they don't take seriously the rights of religious Americans. They don't think the First Amendment, our first freedom, the freedom of conscience, to be Christian, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist, or even nothing at all. They just don't think it's important. But it's our most important freedom. And we have to defend it. The Alliance Defending Freedom is out there fighting for your religious liberty. They don't care who you are. They just care about your rights. Now, for a month, Hugh Hewitt has been telling you about this campaign for the Alliance Defending Freedom. It's a nonprofit organization that's 9-0 in the Supreme Court, battling people who would infringe on your religious rights. They've got over 1,400 open matters across the country, workplaces, college campuses, everywhere else. Anywhere religious freedom is threatened, ADF is there. But they need your help. They need your donations. Look, we got 4 days left in this campaign, and the Hugh Hewitt audience has been the #1 audience on all of Salem. coming out there. I'm going to need your help here. I need you to make a donation today. Go to the top of the Hugh Hewitt banner. The ADF banner is right up at the top. HughHewitt.com, right at the top, and make your donation. Look, if you give a tax-deductible gift of $250 to ADF today, I'm going to send you something. It's a CD, Remembering President Ronald Reagan. It's a Salem Radio Network produced CD, voiced by Bill Bennett, who was President Reagan's Secretary of Education. And it has his personal remembrances, and has the remembrances of others like Gary Bauer, Jack Kemp, Ed Rollins, Ed Meese, the great Gene Kirkpatrick. Boy, if you were alive and an adult when Ronald Reagan was there, you knew that someone in the White House loved America and loved religious freedom. So get this extra special commemorative Remembering President Ronald Reagan CD as our gift to you today only. If you donate $250 or more to Alliance Defending Freedom, just go to HughHewitt.com, click the ADF banner at the top of the homepage, and make your contribution. We'll get right out to you. Look, we've got to fight for our culture. And that's why I'm so proud to talk to you today about the Culture Warrior of the Year contest that we're having here at Salem. The nominees for our Culture Warrior of the Year award are here. Here's the list. It's on HughHewitt.com. You can go there when you hit ADF. You can go there, go to the bottom. You can vote for your choice. Voting's open till Halloween, October 31st. Here are your choices. Charlie Kirk, he's working with young people. Candace Owens, an amazing new voice. That's why the liberals hate her. Alan Sears, he was responsible for ADF. Gary Sinise, he's kind of close to my heart. There's no bigger and stronger supporter of veterans. Abby Johnson, what a powerful, powerful pro-life voice. And, of course, Franklin Graham. Now, again, go to HughHewitt.com. You got two things to do while you're there. You go to the top and you donate to ADF. $250, tax deductible. We get you the Remembering Ronald Reagan CD. Then you go down to the bottom and you vote for Salem's Culture Warrior of the Year Award. Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens, Alan Sears, Gary Sinise, Abby Johnson, Franklin Graham. They're all heroes. You choose the winner. And we're all winners here on the Hugh Hewitt radio program with me, guest host Kurt Schlichter. Stick around. We'll be right back with the great Andrew Surabian.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Oh yeah, that's our theme song here on the Hugh Hewitt radio program, while guest host Kurt Schlichter is in the command console. I'm a retired United States Army colonel. I'm senior columnist for Town Hall. I'm a noted trial lawyer, and I am the scourge of the Never Trump saps. The conservative incorporated losers who failed to conserve anything, who were humiliated and rejected by the election of Donald Trump, the most conservative president in 3 decades, and who sit on the sidelines crying and whining and begging the liberals to allow them back to the party where they can sit at the kiddie table and eat scraps. Pathetic. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. I'm joined by Andrew Surabian right now, communications specialist for conservative causes. He wants to destroy you too. Liberal paradigm. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing good, Kurt, and I agree. I don't want scraps. I want the whole thing.
Exactly. Why are so many, and I'm doing the little air quote thing, conservatives, so eager to settle for losing gracefully?
Because they've been taught to lose for decades now. Since Ronald Reagan, the only thing the conservative movement has gotten used to is losing. I mean, what have we actually succeeded at since the time of Reagan before Trump? I mean, we had some tax cuts with Bush. Besides that, his presidency was an absolute disaster. Part of the reason it was an absolute disaster is because he routinely was in league with the left, creating things like No Child Left Behind with Democrats, Medicare Part D. Not a single thing was being conserved under either Bush, for that matter. And when Republicans were out of power, they were even worse. And it's amazing to me that these people who purport to support conservative principles, and guess what? I purport to support conservative principles, but that's actually why I'm supporting an administration that is legislatively supporting conservative principles and isn't afraid to fight for those conservative principles. Listen, Kurt, you get this better than most people. I read your town hall op-ed every single week. It's one thing to talk about your ideology and to write these nice articles in National Review about your ideology, but it's a whole nother thing to take off the gloves and actually fight for what you believe in.
Well,
and
Andrew Surabian, here's my contention. I don't think anybody should have a position of responsibility in conservatism until he's been in a bar fight. If you haven't gotten your behind kicked and kicked somebody else's behind, I don't think you have any business presuming to lead me into battle.
I think that's a good metric for the type of people that you want out there. Listen, say what you will about Donald Trump. He might be an imperfect man. People like pointing out all the time that, oh, Donald Trump, he's not a real, consistent ideological conservative. But guess what? Donald Trump goes out there and he throws haymakers for the conservative movement every single day. He stares down the left every single day. He stares down the media every single day. Can you imagine George W. Bush staring down the mob and pushing through Kavanaugh? He would have folded like a deck of cards in 13 seconds, Kurt. That's the difference between Donald Trump and the losers in the Republican Party.
I think, and call me a Marxist if you will, but I think a lot of it's about class.
I don't think anyone calls you a Marxist, Kurt. I mean, come on.
Well, I'm going to use a class-based analysis because I think it works here. At the end of the day, a guy like George Bush is more comfortable with the liberals he sees around at the country club than with folks out there in John Deere hats or who work 9-to-5 jobs. I mean, you look at George Bush and he wouldn't fight back. We defended him. For years, we defended him. He wouldn't fight back because he was too much of a gentleman. And he wouldn't say anything about Obama. But boy, Donald Trump beats his tubby ne'er-do-well brother like a drum. And suddenly George Bush discovers his voice. Suddenly George Bush can talk again. And what's he say? He says Trump's terrible. And by implication, those people who voted for him, the same people who defended George Bush tirelessly when he wouldn't defend himself. Frankly, I find it disgraceful.
To steal a line from my old boss, Steve Bannon, the elites in this country are totally comfortable with managing our decline. They're not willing to fight to stop the decline. And speaking of the Bushes, one of my first bosses in politics started working for Ronald Reagan in 1966, and he would consistently lament to me, tell me how upset he was that Ronald Reagan, for the first time in history, turned the Republican Party into the party of the workers, into the party of the middle class. That is the legacy of Ronald Reagan. George H.W. Bush got elected, and in 1 second, it went from the party of the middle class to the party of the country club elitists. And it stayed that way until Donald Trump won the nomination, won the presidency. They hate the fact that we finally have a president who has transformed the Republican Party into what it was always supposed to be, and that is a party for the blue-collar workers, a party for taxpayers, and not a party for the country club elitists, Kurt.
Exactly. It is under President Trump. This isn't a party where the elite gets to send us off to every conflict they find fashionable to shed American blood in. Because in many cases, it ain't their kids; it's ours. And I know these guys. I led them.
I say it all the time, Kurt. It's amazing to me how many so-called conservative intellectuals aren't conservative at all. The only thing many of them seem to care about is involving our nation in these unfettered wars all the time. Of course, they themselves and their kids, they're never volunteering to fight these wars for the most part.
Yeah, I don't remember a lot of bulwark staffers in my platoon, but but then again, you had to be able to do push-ups. Here's the thing. President Trump made it very clear that he was going to have a really, truly Jacksonian foreign policy, the kind that resonates outside of places like New York and Washington, D.C., the kind that I think comes from him standing around with a bunch of Teamsters or iron workers or guys who pour concrete on job sites and getting the common sense which says, hey, don't get my kid involved in some war that you ain't going to win just because, on the other hand, you kill an American like Caleb Mueller, or you behead a couple Americans, we're going to kill everybody you ever met. That's a truly American foreign policy.
I couldn't agree with you more, and it's really interesting. Shortly after the 2016 election, I forget who did the study, but there was a study done showing there was a direct correlation between Trump voters and congressional districts that had heavy casualties in the Iraq and Afghanistan war. And I think that tells you everything you need to know. Trump isn't an isolationist. He's also not a neoconservative hawk. He is a Jacksonian conservative realist. What that means is, just as you just pointed out, while he's not a fan of going around the world and trying to fight other people's battles, he's not looking to send American troops, to deploy American troops to far out lands. But if an American interest, a tangible American interest, is at stake, he will do everything he can to destroy it. And that's exactly what we saw with the leader of ISIS over the weekend. We're disengaging in that area of the world right now. At the same time, there was a high-value target. He goes in, he gets them.
Well, I have some great news for you, Andy, that Victoria Coates of the NSC just gave us. That heroic war dog, our only casualty during the attack on al-Baghdadi, he's going to be all right.
I love it.
Oh, it's great. Let's move on to Congress. You mentioned congressional districts. We've got a swing district in California, the 25th, and suddenly there's a vacancy as Katie Hill has retired, probably by popular, meaning Pelosi demand. We've got a great candidate there, Mike Garcia. He's a Navy fighter pilot, business executive. He's running. This is going to be World War III. Everybody's going to be looking at this special election. What are the Republicans going to do to make sure Mike Garcia has the resources he needs to go in there and take this Republican seat back? Because it's truly a bellwether.
I read up on Mike over the weekend, and you said it right. This guy seems like a total patriot, a total future rock star in the Republican Party. He seems like he's the guy. To win this seat back, we got to make sure, Kurt, that we don't have a million Republicans running and splitting up the vote, because California, of course, has the open ballot system. And so our strategy here needs to be to coalesce behind somebody like Mike Garcia. Ideally, we shouldn't have more than 2 Republicans running in this thing. Let the Democrats have 15 candidates run, and then we might have a runoff with 2 Republicans. This seat is a very important bellwether for the entire nation. If we're going to take this majority back in 2020, we have to win this seat, Kurt.
Well, you are very, very dialed in with the Trump administration. Are we going to see support for Mike Garcia from the Trump organization as this special election approaches?
I'm not sure about that. I haven't spoken to anyone about that. But what I can tell you is that I'm going to be, anyone that I talk to, I'm going to be stressing the importance of making sure we don't have a situation where we have 15 Republicans in this thing and split the vote up so you can have, so it ends up being 2 Democrats in the runoff. That's the great threat here. And so I do think it's really important for Republicans in Washington to coalesce behind a candidate that can unify the entire party around them.
Well, we've only got about 30 seconds left, Andrew Surabian. Nobody knows what's going on in the administration better than you do. Let me ask you, how are we feeling about 2020, 1 year from now?
Listen, the more the liberal media melts down and attacks the president for things that the general public couldn't give a crap about, the higher his chances of re-election are. The more Democrats tack to the left, the more they talk about giving free health care to illegal immigrants, the more they talk about Medicare for all, the more sensible the American people will see the president as.
Outstanding, Andrew Surabian. This is the Hugh Hewitt radio program. I'm guest host Kurt Schlichter. We'll be right back.
Hi, it's Hugh Hewitt. No matter who is sitting in for me, I do want to remind you about AndrewandTodd.com. AndrewandTodd.com. Take care of everyone who listens to this show. They take care of our guest hosts if they need to get their home refinanced or they want to buy an investment property. Colonel Kurt, Mark Davis, Bob France, all the people who sit in for me, I mean, they're rolling in dough. They do this for hobbies. They're out there. They're big real estate investors like you should be. And if you want to invest in real estate, go to AndrewandTodd.com. Time for you to diversify out of stocks and bonds and cash. Time for you to get an income-producing property. The person who will get you qualified, Andrew Del Rey or Todd Avakian. And you can find them at AndrewandTodd.com. Answer a few questions. Tell them you want to become a real estate investor. They'll be right back to you with the best offer, the best rate. They'll also help you find an agent no matter where you are in the United States. AndrewandTodd.com can also be reached at 888-888-1172. 888-888-1172. Don't wait another day. AndrewandTodd.com. Time now for ReliefFactor.com. My daily reminder, even when I am out of the country and traveling, I like to remind people in the country and listening, especially those of you who are commuting this morning, that ReliefFactor.com is your friend. And if you've got an ache and pain this morning, you wish you had taken it, well, today is the day to go to ReliefFactor.com and order the starter pack. I yammer at you every single day, 3 times a day, at the same time every hour, that you ought to have taken your Relief Factor. Now, part of that is just to remind the tens of thousands of you who already have it, not to leave the house without it. But part of it is also to nudge some of you, especially my new markets that are added on every week, that ReliefFactor.com really does work. Icarian and curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, the 4 natural supplements widely recognized as doctors as necessary to your good health. It really does work. It really has taken all the guesswork out of it, all the engineering out of it, perfectly designed. 4 supplements, easy to swallow. I take them every day. You ought to join the tens of thousands of people who do as well. ReliefFactor.com, ReliefFactor.com. Get started today.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Guest host Kurt Schlichter. The bumper music you hear, another of my outstanding bumper music selections, Young Americans by Bowie, which leads us in to our next guest, Phil Klein, executive editor of the Washington Examiner, author of the new book. And I got to tell you, look, every once in a while I read a scary book, or a Stephen King or something. I have not been scared about a book like this for a long time. It's called Fear Your Future, How the Deck is Stacked Against Millennialisms and Why Socialism Would Make It Worse. Philip, how are you?
How are you?
Hey, I'm fine. Congratulations on the book. It terrified me.
Happy to help. Unfortunately, it is a very terrifying phenomenon. One thing that I point out in the book is that we're entering an era of unprecedented debt. If you go back to the George Washington era, the only time that debt has been higher was for a brief period during World War II. But unlike World War II, it isn't driven by one event that's going to go away. It's driven by the long-term leviathan of the welfare state, which is growing bigger and bigger, and it's going to blow past the record levels in the coming decades and not look back without dramatic changes. And as I point out, at the same time, millennials are ill-prepared for dealing with this and the ravages of preparing for retirement because they are facing a number of headwinds in terms of living costs, things like housing, obviously education, student loans, health care. The problem is that they're increasingly being drawn to these sort of easy solutions by the Warren Sanders wing of the Democratic Party, which is that, well, government's just going to solve all your problems. Of course, trying to say that you're going to do free housing and student loans and free college and so forth and healthcare is only going to make the first problem dramatically worse. So that's why I felt I had to write this book, Fear Your Future, to try to hope to steer them and the younger generation in a different way.
Well, in Fear the Future, you mentioned that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and that whole wing have an innovative new theory about how to pay for everything, which is you just sort of print more money. What is up with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's this new idea called modern monetary theory, which is so out there that the Paul Krugman, who is always talking about not to worry about deficit alarmism, he's written critical columns. He's at war with MMT because
wait a minute. Noted Enron advisor Paul Krugman thinks this is crazy talk. I just want to make sure I'm getting this clear.
Yes, and one of the leading proponents of this school was an advisor to Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign and advises a lot of Democratic candidates. And the short version of it is they think that if any government that prints its own currency cannot actually have a debt crisis. So
well, I think the Weimar Republic might, if it wasn't on the ash heap of history, might have something to say. Philip Klein, author of Fear the Future. You're also executive editor of the Washington Examiner. Let's talk a little about what's going on. What can we look forward to this week in the ongoing impeachment nightmare in Washington?
Well, it seems as though the Democrats are just trying to, add more and more witnesses. I think that the question is that there were some contradictions in between the testimonies of various witnesses. Bill Taylor's account of what went on, he was the top diplomat based in Ukraine, was more ominous than the one delivered by Gordon Sondland, who was the EU ambassador. And so I think that we might see some testimony that's going to try to reconcile those differences.
Well, in fact, Bill Taylor's testimony was sort of fourth-hand hearsay. Now, I'm a trial lawyer. I do hearsay. Usually you have one hearsay, but in this, it's like literally, well, this guy heard that this guy that heard this guy that this heard that this other guy. It seems to me that they are throwing out basic rules of evidence, basic rules of due process, like the right to cross-examine witnesses. We've got about 15, 20 seconds. How do you think the portrayal by the administration of this as an unfair kangaroo court is going to go over with the American people?
I mean, I think the main thing is that the only thing that's going to change things is if Republicans actually are afraid of losing. And I think that right now, most Republicans in the Senate fear the primary electorate more than they do the general election.
Well, that's great news, Philip Klein, author of Fear the Future. Those are that is music to my ears, because if there's anything our politicians should be, it's in mortal fear of their constituents. This is the Hugh Hewitt radio program. This is the end of the show, but I'm going to be back here tomorrow, and I've got some amazing guests, including my personal friend, Rick Grinnell, the ambassador to Germany. I'll see you tomorrow.